The Castlevania series is known for its challenging platforming routes, testing you at every twist and turn with awkward enemy placement, extreme pitfalls, and over-the-top boss rushes that will find you questioning your own gaming integrity. The difficulty curve is somewhat essential to tell a narrative. Life's biggest challenges never come easily, and in many ways, challenges are overcome with growth, trial and error, and repetition. And after you've scratched and clawed your way through the various challenges faced, you get a true sense of accomplishment knowing you were put to the test. This series takes everything we love about the classic horror motif and encapsulates it into a simplistic story draped in cryptic imagery, questionable lore, and best of all, legendary platforming that is now etched into our subconscious. Where many consider Castlevania III a return to form, I look at it more so as an evolution of the formula, combining philosophies from the first two installments, taking the hardcore platforming from the original, and incorporating in the non-linear exploration aspect of Simon's quest, along with a diversified cast of characters to consistently switch up the playstyles along the road ahead. So how exactly did we end up on this road? Well, in order to figure that one out, let's go back. The year is 1476, and Dracula has begun to lead an invasion of night creatures across the vast reaches of Europe. His hatred of humans for their lack of empathy fuels his desire to exterminate all of mankind. Now, I know over the years we have gotten a fantastic 4-season Netflix series highlighting the storied events throughout this time period, yet to keep things concurrent with the NES timeline, I'm retelling the events that simply led up to each game until further exploring the franchise. That being said, at this time, the Belmont clan was now exiled from Wallachia, merely misunderstood by those that witnessed their extraordinary powers. As Dracula again slowly rose to power, those of church and state are left with no choice but to seek out the legendary wielder of the vampire killer to save their souls. Trevor Belmont, last survivor of the Belmont family bloodline, dons the vampire killer once more to slay the many night creatures that now purge upon his homeland. Trevor won't face the Prince of Darkness alone though, as he will make a handful of allies on the way, some a bit more well known than others throughout history. So, who are these rambunctious young rebels? Well, let's go through them one by one. Our first companion is Saifa Bonates, a priestess in disguise whom is currently cosplaying an apprentice monk, sent out on a mission to dig up some intel on this Count Dracula. Her mission, however, would come up short after a run-in with a giant cyclops, turning her to stone until further rescued by a handsome prince. Grant the Nasty is quite the character, a pirate by trade yet wannabe babyface assassin by night. Hailing from the great city of Wallachia, he once planned an all-out ambush of the Count, lasting all about 30 seconds with his entire fleet being wiped out. He now roams the countryside, still willing to fight the good fight. Saving the best for last, we have none other than our boy Alucard himself, son of Dracula and one of the most complex characters of the entire Castlevania series. He opposes his father's way of life. This internal conflict helps him search out answers while aiding in ending his father's reign and conquest of the homelands. Castlevania III focuses heavily on a partner system that's dependent on the many avenues to travel and how you embark on them. Your adventure always begins as Trevor Belmont, set out on the beaten path, but soon enough, you will pick up his allies throughout. Each ally has distinct abilities that grants you a great deal of variety, which diversifies your playstyle according to your preference. Trevor bears that classic Belmont aesthetic, armed with his iconic Demon Slayer, the Vampire Killer, and an arsenal of unique sub-weapons. He essentially plays like Simon Belmont, but with a bit more stature and swagger. Saifa is essentially Transylvania's version of the Avatar, with a badass array of elemental powers that are a true blessing to use throughout this adventure. It's an absolute blast finding her many spellbooks, freezing night creatures on impact, or torching them to a crisp in an instant. The Nasty comes armed with his trusty dagger, picking up the pace while adding a great deal of fluidity, which allows you to climb walls and pivot mid-jump. Playing as Alucard is like having Dracula right by your side. He can tap into the same dark magic as his father, while taking to the skies to navigate across the many painstakingly difficult sections of our story. Plan your flight accordingly, because Alucard will deplete hearts quicker than a tanker of jet engine fuel. Remember, as you journey forward, Trevor can only recruit one character at a time, so in the event you discover a second ally, someone will need to stay behind to keep a safe lookout. Just give it some thought when you reach that fork in the road. You also won't be able to encounter all three allies in one playthrough, so you will be running things back a few times to truly soak in the entire expedition. Every stage of Castlevania III tells a story. From the opening act you travel throughout, trekking through Trevor's homeland, which is now under siege from the war on Dracula. The visuals alone have drastically improved, and it feels like Konami has now begun to fire on all cylinders, slowly mastering the NES hardware, right down to how well Trevor feels to control. As you navigate your way through the church, gameplay feels tight and responsive, and it never felt sweeter to slay a field of zombies rising from the graveyard. Even your first big bad encounter with the Skull Knight just feels impressive to battle in combat. The soundtrack for Castlevania III is noticeably complex in sound. There was a great deal of collaboration throughout, and the diversity in sound bleeds into every act. Each stage sort of builds off the next, like those mid-2000s Hans Zimmer scores. By now, a majority of Castlevania fans know there's a stark difference in sound between the US and Famicom releases. This in large part is due to the Famicom release containing Konami's VRC6 chip, which essentially is an advanced MMC chip that supports bang switching for programmable code and graphics, as well as a CPU cycle-based IRQ counter. What makes this so special for Castlevania III is that the chip supports 3 additional sound channels, so in other words, the Famicom score amps it up that much more. Heading back to the action, as you leave the village of Wallachia, you reach the first fork in the road. Here you have 2 main routes of travel, the upper route and the lower route. The upper region will find Trevor journeying across the Great Lakes, staggered across the countryside's rich architectural routes, which in time lead you through the front gates of Castle Dracula. You can also journey the lower region, leading you through many interconnected tunnel systems and caverns, only to eventually climb your way out to the castle mainframe. Castlevania III is pretty hefty in size for an NES release, allowing for multiple ways to experience the full adventure, leading to 4 unique endings by going at it alone or with one of 3 friends. Each stage unfolds to a unique theme, and each choice you make is integral. Taking the upper path finds Trevor navigating the twisting and turning gear system of the clock tower. Yes, you can easily meet an untimely death, as the stage suggests, pivoting from platform to platform while walking across the many interconnected gears. The stage continues to scroll upwards, so you have to contend with an absurd amount of floating heads on the fly that can easily send you to an early grave. The stairs themselves are the most crippling aspect, as you need to maintain your footwork while utilizing the entire edge of each platform for clearance all the way to the very tip top of the tower. Here you can hitch a ride across swinging pendulums to reach our buddy Grant, who is now cosplaying as the Hunchback of Notre Dame, swinging about the ceiling like an asshole. He will attempt to drop down atop you, but he's not too difficult. Release him from the curse and he will come to his senses, joining you as our heroes continue forward. On the flip side, if you want to look for Sypha, you must choose the lower path, venturing through a forest of night owls whom poke out from their nests to silence the commotion. This will only leave you lost to the mist that rolls in, covered in floating shrooms that will leave our Belmont tripping balls on contact. If you get caught up here, you will be begging for relief as you run into some Hogwarts-sized spiders and an angry Cyclops as the stage block closes out. This guy is an absolute cinch if you know his pattern, and he tends to charge more often for me when he's on the right side. Taking this route will free Sypha from her stone slumber, giving you your first ally. If you instead decide to search out Alucard, then you will remain on the lower path, but take a detour across the murky marshes. The marshes can easily overwhelm you your first time through, getting adjusted to the many swamps, home to some killer wildlife that will spring out randomly for a midnight feeding. Continue forward brings you to the nesting grounds of a giant bat that sheds its skin on contact. It constantly divides, and much like the floating mushrooms earlier, you can get overwhelmed if you don't manage to contain them early on. This path will eventually lead us to Alucard's cave, that's quite literally melting away from within. Acid drips down, melting away the stage, clearing the path of travel ahead. This is what I would consider the hardest route throughout, as you constantly have to kill respawning mummies and pyromaniacs lurking about while the various underground tunnels are littered with traps and sketchy platforms. You will be taking a huge leap of faith just to arrive to Alucard's chamber. He's probably the trickiest of the 3 allies to acquire, as he attacks just like his pops did in our first outing. Besting Alucard will prove your worth to him as he joins you on your quest to locate his father. Depending on which ally you pick up along the way, your path to reach Castle Dracula will change, and there's so many ways to go about this. You can journey the cursed castle that's reminiscent of the first Castlevania, now for the most part vertically scrolling, dodging souped up Medusas now in the form of gargoyle guards. These guys can be really tricky, as their sheer size makes dodging them a real problem. As you climb to the top, you run into an old foe who is just dying for a rematch. Welcome back, Frankie. There's the sunken city of Poltergeist, not to be confused with the city of Atlantis, that has some of the most beautiful stage design Dracula's Curse has to offer. The difficulty ramps up the farther you go, and the stage will slowly submerge itself as you attempt to find a way out. Just when you manage to find a dry spot, you encounter a bone dragon that sends you on a wild goose chase across the city. You can take a trip across the sea, boarding a haunted ghost ship, which is my absolute favorite stage of Dracula's Curse. The platforming here can get hella tricky, especially when jumping across the ship's sails. The creativity in design is where Castlevania III slowly begins to win you over. You'll be casting brutal spells with Sypha's Book of Dark Arts, torching the many spirit passengers on board. Hell, Medusa herself took this excursion across the sea, and she made quite the cosmetic upgrade since Castlevania 1. Huh, good for her. The end of the stage is where the challenge slowly ramps up. From here on out, the game begins to give you almost mini gauntlets throughout. You now have multiple end stage encounters to deal with. I'll ultimately torch the mummified crew members with Sypha and switch to Trevor to deal with another Cyclops. The game is constantly making you pivot on the fly, using your partner system to its full advantage. Another personal favorite is the bridge that leads to Castle Dracula. It's the merman's version of the Zora domain from Legend of Zelda, filled with demonic sea creatures that are preventing you from reaching the Vampire King. There's some tricky segments throughout, and the ravens will undoubtedly pick you off their first few cracks at it. My favorite boss fight of the game is here also, the two-headed Hydra. You need to ground your ass to the center platform for this fight, constantly chipping away with sub-weapons. If it's possible, grab the crosshair because these two are constantly on the move. The main hall of Dracula's castle is where all the branching paths converge. We are greeted to a reimagining of the original opening act of the NES original. Climbing the twisted chambers, you will eventually find the floor below you crumbling away, leading you into the chamber with Death himself. Critics complained about Death being a pushover in Simon's Quest. Well, you got the real deal here. Death will be up to his old tricks, sending a flurry of cynical sights your way. As the fight wages on, he won't hold back, transforming right in front of your very eyes for a second go at it. Depending on your pickups along the way, will change how you go about this battle, favoring your outcome accordingly. It's a fun fight, but patience and timing is everything. Dracula's castle has taken many forms over the years, and it gets pretty wild here on out. Harpies and hunchbacks will lead an assault as you journey across the many traps stretched throughout the halls. The castle was quite the sight, carved out with fine detail throughout as waterfalls and jet streams flood the halls. The platforming will only kick things up, relying on your instincts to take a hold as you constantly move upwards as the castle attempts to consume you from within. Trevor's doppelganger can be a real bitch as he will match you step by step, right down to your accessories. I always try to fake him out to keep him from following suit, prepared to take a leap of faith in hopes to have enough distance on him to fire back. Every showdown with our boy Dracula wouldn't be climactic without the castle's dreaded clock tower. It only embodies the Castlevania aesthetic and what sets it apart from the rest. This incarnation doesn't disappoint. Descending from the very tops of the tower, you emerge through the mist, traveling up and over Drac's stronghold while the castle self-destructs behind you. The swinging pendulums become your taxi across the tower into Dracula's keep. Climbing your way across the infamous stairway to hell, you confront the Prince of Darkness once more, just like old times. Wait, this is a prequel? For the first time, I think. Holy hell, this is the Dracula fight of Dracula fights. Vlad is somehow more powerful in his past incarnation than when Simon had to deal with him. Here you will be going through a gauntlet of transformations that will make a Dragon Ball fan hyped by Endgame. Drac's first form is a tradition, going blow for blow with the handsome devil himself as you navigate the room avoiding his flames. The more you keep a steady pace, the far greater your chances are for survival, preventing the blood-sucking bastard from closing in on you with his flames. The more you spread the floor, the easier it is for you to clear them. His second form is quite a disturbing sight, a vine of talking heads that don't seem to have their shit together as they attempt to steer their twisted grapevine across the room. If you don't have a solid sub-weapon, then just hack away at them, focusing in on the upper heads first and working your way down. His final form isn't what I expected. Not the cookie monster of old, but also not the sort of beast from Legend I've grown accustomed to. This is sort of like an amalgamation between a gargoyle and a Cornish hen. A massive winged clucker so large in stature the room itself begins to fall apart, becoming pathways to navigate about. With the proper sub-weapon, you can manage to play keep away long enough to deal him some damage. Once you deplete your reserves, you will innately begin riding the stage panels as you dodge his assault, avoiding lasers and delivering a final fury, wounding your trusty vampire killer. After a grueling gauntlet with Dracula, our storied events come to a close, watching on as Castle Dracula crumbles away back into the ether. Depending on which companion you bring along, your story plays out slightly differently. With Dracula sealed away once more, Alucard becomes conflicted. Internalizing the realization that he has ended his own father causes him to return once more to his internal slumber. Our boy Dynasty continues to fight the good fight, now overseeing construction of Wallachia for the betterment of tomorrow. As Trevor and Cypher restore peace to the lands, they grow quite fond of each other, eventually settling down, creating a greater future for one another, solidifying the legacy of the Belmont clan. Castlevania III, in my opinion, is a perfect NES platformer. In many ways, the difficulty is far higher than its two predecessors, yet the options for branching pathways, combined with a partner system, gives you what many difficulty curves do not: options. When it comes to early platformers, the sheer level of difficulty is confined to a specific area, enemy placement, or obstacle, hindering the overall experience. Yet in Castlevania III, you have branching pathways, each with their own unique stage gimmicks and hazards regulated to the various stage themes. In addition, if an area gives me difficulty, I have the option to pick up allies and powers which are allocated to the various party members. You can find which character's playstyle suits you the best, or give yourself that true old school test with the Trevor only run. Nevertheless, these contributing factors not only fine-tune your skill set, but gives you varying degrees of perception to see the stage in a magnitude of ways that creatively gives you the freedom to adjust your playstyle, promoting replayability for future runs, with each having their own unique experience and story progression. That's what sets Castlevania III apart from the rest of the pack. When we return, we are going back to where it all began, with a soft reboot of sorts, giving us some much needed closure on Simon's legendary adventures across Transylvania. The 16-bit revolution is here, and a new generation of gaming is upon us. Taking the legacy of the Belmont family into the 4th generation of home consoles, we will be looking at Super Castlevania IV. See you there, gang.